please, a round of applause for young Bunge.
Thank you. I had a very difficult couple of weeks in a very good way, but it just meant that I had very little time to actually prepare this particular talk. And so when it was time to come here, I thought, since this is day one, maybe I talk a little bit about kind of where I'm coming from and what gets me excited at this moment in time. So you just have to stop me at some point. I'm just going to keep going. It's a bit random. I think the whole point of these first talks is to inspire, and since each of you are going to have other things that might trigger your inspiration, I just put together a potpourri of things. So I start at the beginning. I was born in 72. I was born into a confused German hippie community where I think it's fair to say that at this time there was a lot to be against in Germany, but they hadn't quite figured out what they were for yet. And we were kind of poor hippies, but my dad had rich hippie friends, and some were living in upstate New York, and so I spent a lot of time upstate New York chasing my breakfast eggs, and it was kind of borderline neglect, I would say, because it was really, the idea was just, we're just going to let kids do whatever the fuck they want, and we're not going to interfere with any of it, which I don't recommend anybody doing. I mean, but the truth is that I was definitely unbelievably confused, by the end of it, and Berlin was a great place to be confused in, and then the wall came down, and something happened that I think is difficult to understand, retrospectively, but today people think about Berlin as such an open and free and wonderful place, but in reality it has been unbelievably restrictive and very, very authoritarian in many, many ways. And so what happened was that people suddenly realized that there was a lack of control for the first time, I think, in German history, really. The events just happened so quickly in the run-up to the reunification and the wall coming down, that the system just didn't have any means to establish control fast enough. So overnight, the city became double its size, and there was just not enough police to police the streets. There was not enough people to check. You could open up a nightclub or do anything you want, really. And people realized very quickly that they can just go and do stuff, and they did. And it was a really lovely time, to be there, because it really felt like for the first time, you could kind of trust people in just taking control and doing beautiful and amazing things. And so at the same time, there has been a lot of really interesting moments in the city where, very transformative moments. So Berlin is full of bunkers, relics from the Second World War, and this is a central bunker which then happened to become like the biggest place for hardcore techno music, and today it's the house of the Boris collection, with this lovely art collector with a little penthouse on top. So I feel like growing up in Berlin at this time, for me, was really very much about exploring this question of what if, and looking into things changing and opportunities. And another kind of key moment, I think, was when Christo came and wrapped the Reichstag, and it just had this monumental effect on the whole city, where people just felt like a spaceship had landed, and it completely transformed everything, and the whole conversations. I think the whole psychology of the city really changed just because of that one moment to gather and to be in awe and just, yeah. So anyway, at the time I had left school, and my first business was in demolition, and this was very much down to the fact that it was just easy for me to get into, but at the same time, work for me was very much about just making money to support my life. My life was living with a bunch of friends and 2 women and 4 children in a very lovely setting. And during the day, we would destroy stuff and put it into a container. And the beautiful thing about that is that it's a very simple kind of work that has a really real kind of meditative quality to it. And especially if you have anger issues, or you generally, after destroying shit for a whole day, you're relaxed. It's all good, and you made a lot of money. But at some point I figured that maybe that's not the best way of doing it. So I started seeing a shrink for 6 years, figuring out all this stuff, and the one thing that I realized way too late, unfortunately, was that the one thing that I was personally missing was balance, and I mean kind of physical balance, standing on my own 2 feet and standing on one leg and just feeling grounded and feeling balanced. I wish I had found this out 20 years ago. But after the demolition business, I thought, if I don't study now, I'm gonna be stuck on a construction site for the rest of my life, and I was already getting allergies from the cement dust, and so I went to the university, and they had a big book at the entrance at the technical university with all the courses, and I started at A, and I got to L for landscape architecture, and it kind of read half interesting because it was like all scales, a bit of sociology, a bit of biology, a bit about humans, a bit about living and future, and so I enrolled in landscape architecture, and I got very much obsessed with this idea of nature, and this is a depiction of paradise, where paradise, the idea of the word paradise actually translated, you could trace back to the idea of a garden, and a garden at the time, or in general, is a place, a piece of land that we put a wall around to protect ourselves from evil nature, which is behind that wall. So we're cultivating nature, and that's our garden, that's our paradise. So by now, I was a bit late studying, and I felt like I'm 10 years too late, and I need to speed up things, and so I found the most committed young students that I could find, and we set up a studio in our second year, doing a lot of competitions, because that's the only way you can win work, and it was Berlin, so there was also a lot of space. So it was a fun group of people that I've been with for many years, and fun in many ways. For one, what we really all enjoyed, we came from very different backgrounds and had very different ideas, but we had this idea of collectively designing. So it was like group therapy, really, where we would have a big piece of paper and we would draw everything together. Every line was a discussion, an endless discussion about why this wall should be there or not. But also we shared a passion for research. So small projects turned into massive projects, because like everything else, the deeper you go, it's like a fractal. The deeper you go, the more you experience. And I got really very much into looking deeper, and found many different things, of which I'm going to share a bunch. One thing that I realized very early on was that it's actually really good to be constrained and to have limitations if you are designing. The worst thing that can happen is to have an open brief where everything is possible and unlimited funds are available. So this is my favorite project, where they came and they said, everything is decided. We decided the pavement, the trees, but the city of Leipzig had forgotten that they need 2 fountains. And they said, you can't change anything, but we need 2 fountains. And so what we did was we extracted the stones and the Z-axis, same granite, and to create some seating and put some water in between. And then, this is all kind of came from this woman that I had the pleasure of working with when I was doing my internship, Martha Schwartz, an American landscape architect who, in my opinion, really pioneered this idea of working with what you have and taking any kind of obstacle as a blissful inspiration, if you like. So making a lot out of very little. Her whole portfolio is full of projects which are on top of parking garages, where as a landscape architect there's not much you can do, and then there was almost always no budget. So make something out of nothing with no budget. So it's color and cheap material that she went to, and I had the pleasure of working with her on many occasions, and mainly the projects where the budgets were not quite high enough for her yet, and I would do the first bit until the client could see that this could actually go somewhere. And one of those projects, normally I would just stay for a couple of weeks and then I would leave, but one of them I did stay, where we won a job in Damascus in Syria, and the idea was to it was actually the question was, can we change the education system in Syria by creating a parallel dimension, which is like a parallel school of life in some sort, where kids can do whatever they cannot do in the regular school. So they can scream, they can get dirty. We had this running joke on this project that if a kid breaks a leg on our side, it actually means that we have succeeded, because it means that they actually did dare something and they did do something that they were not allowed to do. And this is how far I got before the war started. But it brought me to Damascus, and I lived in Damascus for 5 years. I ended up really falling in love first with the city, and then I met my future wife in the same place. But Damascus is like many fast-growing cities, full of problems, and my way in really was through organizing summer schools and discussing some of the issues that I have been since very much involved in, and all of the stuff that I'm interested in really in one way or another has to do with our presence on this planet, and all the connected issues, whether it's water or how we're going to feed the planet, the energy, and obviously communication. Communication is something I'm obsessed with, because I do believe that our biggest challenge is to find ways in which we can communicate with people that we normally don't talk with. And what I mean is that we are in a time where the problems are so complex that we really need to truly work in a kind of interdisciplinary way. And I was on so many projects in my professional life where we would present to the client that we are this 40 people integrated team that, of engineers and sociologists and biologists and all these people coming together to solve this problem. But in reality, we were not. In reality, we don't speak each other's language. Most often, we hate each other. In the end, it comes down to who can define what. It's a power struggle, and it's nothing of a sort that we need to create. So I'm very much into looking deep. I think I mentioned the fractal. I think it's this beautiful thing about our life is that the more you engage with anything, the more rich and the more intense it gets. There is definitely something about dreaming big, and I had the pleasure to travel around the world a lot. So there is a lot of really crazy stuff out there. And then personally, I mean, I grew up I was born in the 70s, but I mean, people like Hans Rucker, the whole question around how we perceive space is something that maybe one of my key topics in my life. It's like I was always surprised when architects talk about the fact that they're designing spaces for people, but then when you go a little bit deeper and you try to figure out what do you actually understand about how people perceive space, then very soon you realize that there's maybe two areas that we have studied in depth in terms of perception, and one is office space. We do understand how to enhance productivity and how to get more out of people, and that's why there's some understanding on how people perceive office space and hospital space, because we have an interest in shortening the time that you're spending in a hospital. Hausrucker I love because this idea of a one-to-one experiment where you quickly build something and test it. And then today, I mean, there's people like Ben van Berkel at your studio picked up some stuff. I think it's really nice to go back in time to see kind of where we are today. I mean, Super Studio, ArchiZoom. I mean, anybody who does their plans with a typewriter, I think, deserves a mention. But this was like so when Archigram was the kind of machine-led, ArchiZoom was the hippie version of that. And here's Snøhetta last year. So, these studios, they had a very broad remit, and it was really, I think, fascinating to me, how, and it's very much needed today, I think, in this kind of highly specialized industry, where, on one hand, it's all about, just creating provocations to start a discussion, and on the other hand, there's no limit from your performance and your everybody knows Buckminster Fuller, but I think I just picked this up again recently. It's really worth reading, and it's a good reminder that we're really standing on the shoulder of giants. Massive change had a massive impact, and I do like the writings of Rem Koolhaas. If you ever, I used to teach at the university, and I used to force my students to read his text like people used to read Marx, meaning you read it in a group and you go sentence by sentence and then you discuss every sentence, because the beautiful thing about his writing is that he leaves so much space for interpretation, and it really is whatever you want it to be. It's a very interesting way of describing architecture, but he also had some really groundbreaking ideas about designing structures that allow flexibility, and that is another thing that, I guess, me growing up without any structure, I'm very obsessed with structure. I think structure is a good thing, actually. there's a beautiful way to build structures and processes to actually enable freedom to happen with them. And this kind of, I like to refer to like the empty shelf that you are designing, and maybe on the process you have to kind of start loving the ugly, and in the end it's about creating space for people. So when I was in Damascus, just the moment that my studio was starting to make some money after 3 years trying to win work, the war had started, and a good friend of mine called, and he knew that I had no plan B, and I was kind of stranded together with my now wife in Beirut, and he was like, do you want to come to London and run my studio, a creative studio? And I was flattered, and I said, why me? I have no idea in the kind of creative industries. And he said, well, you work with a lot of difficult people on very complex projects, and that's exactly what we do. And and so I went, and I thought, okay, there's a bunch of 20 artists, let's see. But the beautiful thing was that Squint Opera was founded 10 years before I joined, 20 years ago. And it was literally 4 friends who had studied architecture, but they didn't want to become architects. And they didn't know what they wanted to do, really. And Will Alsop was the father of one of them. And he said, you and your mates, they can have some tables here, and you can figure it out. And so these 4, they liked the idea of filmmaking, but never made a film. And so Will was like, hey, you can make films with me, we can make films. And so they made films, and Will really was, in my opinion, the most fearless architect in the UK. And he actually had a very beautiful principle. He decided for himself that work had to be fun, and the fun included the client. And so he went bankrupt 5 times and didn't build a lot, but that is just who he was. And so when Squint Opera started, this is when I joined. It was a bunch of lovely people who were trying to figure out what they want to do in their lives. And the beautiful thing about that moment is that if you don't know what you want, then suddenly everything is an opportunity, everything is interesting. And so we went in every direction you can possibly imagine. We convinced our landlord that they should give us the ground floor, and we opened a bar, which at the beginning we would whitewash all the walls and give people alcohol and pens and let them just draw on every object and everything in the courtyard. And then it matured into more of a business, but we also got our friends in, and we had a music studio, a full recording studio, kind of experimental music at the time, and then forward 15 years, it's 80 people in London. We have a small studio in New York, and for some reason, it kind of retrospectively made sense. It kind of all made sense the moment that we started building physical experiences that have a digital layer. So we work a lot with cultural space, with museums, but also a lot for cities and very large scale real estate developers. Like if you want to build a new city, or if you want to extend something on a massive scale, then you have something very complicated and complex to negotiate, and you would come to us and we would help you all the way from the moment you have an idea until you operate. And so our team hasn't grown with the business in mind, but it was just people who ended up being there, and then we had to find work in film and animation and graphic design and music and digital design and interactive stuff and more real-time worlds and 3D worlds that we're currently mainly focused on. But everything that we do, because it's all at the core, we're all designers, so even if it's a strategy, it's all very much about thinking about the application and immediately starting to sketch and to but in the end, it's a very vast amount of different things that we do. It's kind of always difficult to explain. When I set up the New York office in America, you have to be like in a box. They can't deal with you being good at more than one thing. And so the question always was, tell me the one thing that you are actually doing, and yeah, I struggled. But one of the things that we ended up doing was, we ended up building our own tools, meaning we would build our own, backend. So in an exhibition setting, for example, or we would do the backend, the front end, and all the content, and a lot of experimentation around. So maybe one of the projects that is really where it all kind of came together, or when the studio started to make sense, was we did all the digital stuff for the visitor experience at Empire State Building, and suddenly we needed all the things that we are doing. So the client was literally not able, nobody really is, I think, to understand what we're trying to do just looking at an image or even at a video. So we mocked up everything in real time, and we set up headsets in the different locations where he lives, and We did all the client reviews in VR. This was before the pandemic, and it was really the first time, I think, that we understood that what these simulation technologies actually deliver for us today is the ability to virtually test experiences before we start building them, and this works on every scale, and I think there's something really quite exciting about it. But so everything that you are seeing is from the green screen to the character animation to whatever, we do all that stuff in-house. We used to be 150 people doing everything in-house, which we had to change because it's very difficult to sustain as a business. So right now we have a bunch of partner studios that we also work with. But yeah, so one of the things that I started 6 years ago was on a call with Bjarke. We were talking about a project, and the design had just changed, and we're on a video call, and he takes a piece of paper and a pen, and he's trying to explain to me on the screen, like, it's now looking a bit like this, the building is like, and we're both sitting there and thinking, this it cannot be the way we are discussing a spatial condition in an architectural context. And so, in some way, the way we communicate architecture hasn't much changed since 100 years, where we're talking about, we're showing things in plan and in section, and the client is not very engaged, and the interns are quite tired in the background. And so we did this first sketch of, what if, could we do a project room, like a virtual project room where we can all meet, and we have this one real-time model, and then we can do all these things with it, and then let's put all the data in, and then host it in the cloud, and distribute to everybody, and then you can display this content on every other and use it for public engagement or your design process or your sales and marketing stuff. And at Squint, we would do a concept film. So this was maybe 6 years ago.
First colony established on Mars.
Just to imagine for ourselves, for the studio,
3D model
what this
from
would
the
be.
architects. There are two conflicts with the landscape design.
Quick test off.
It's really just an internal.
Activate spaceform.
Spaceform activated.
Quite fun to look.
Show me project 1280.
Displaying project 1280. Project's content.
At the time, I mean, this was all, I think, technically possible, but nobody had an
Load the
interest
landscape file.
in any of that stuff.
Show me plot 3.
Displaying plot 3.
Now display 3D models.
You get
New
the idea.
model sent 1 minute ago.
Ah, okay. All right, load. Highlight design conflicts.
Displaying conflicts.
I'm going to run a bit.
Slide.
I want a bit through this. So, today it's a platform that we use on many projects where you can imagine any kind of project room where I can take you through the design of the project concept. We can be up to 100 people in this persistent worlds, and then after you have understood the general gist of the thing, then I can summon us. It's like a 3D PowerPoint, really. I can summon us around the table, and we can talk about stuff in a bit more detail. And then in the end, you can jump in. This for doing an early design stage. Was for a competition where people can understand a bit better the kind of spatial conditions, and there's a bunch of tools that you can use to whatever mark up or measure or leave comments or interact somehow with this world. I think there's an enormous amount of possibilities and lots to explore. But personally, when like everybody else, I guess, during the pandemic, I was like, fuck, what am I doing with my life? I have to figure out, and so I had COVID actually really badly at the beginning, and I was really feverish, and I hate being ill, and I hate being in bed, and so I started doing these little pictograms and wrote my own like feverish blog about these topics, because in the end, I think, it's really super important that first we have to define our values. We have to understand what do we want to create and why. And then we have to really carefully look at our current processes and systems because they're just not fit for purpose. In the end, it's all about, teaming up and co-creating this stuff. But also, let's just find better ways to engage with the public and the society as a whole, because I think it's a really untapped kind of collective intelligence that is there, and then there's a lot of tools, and it's really insane to see a lot of the things that we've been talking about for 10 years are converging in this kind of second wave of digital transformation, I think, and I'm very interested in how we perceive space and spatial sensing. Obviously, billions of years of nature we shouldn't ignore. And then more and more, I was never into that stuff, but I realized, the biggest designer at the end of the day is the Excel sheet. And it's really, if we don't figure out ways to manage risk and get things financed, then, you can have the greatest idea you want, but you won't get anywhere. So I believe currently we are kind of aiming for whatever, zero carbon and energy neutral, but in the future, our cities or places where we live actually have to be productive. And today we are kind of happy if the environment's not bad for us, but in the future, we will judge it by how good it is for us. So these are like really big challenges that in order, to get anywhere close to those solutions, we really need to kind of completely update our current processes and systems, meaning the way we educate and incentivize and everything really is not fit for us to really come together and to co-create the necessary solutions. And so this is true in my opinion, in education, professional practice, and city administration. Just for simplicity, I took the city administration as an example where we have adopted this logic where obviously it's quite complex to run a city, but our solution to deal with this complexity was to put everything in a silo. And so we have at the GLA in London, for example, there's amazing teams that are looking after housing or transportation or educational sector, and they are really experts in their field. And then we tell them to kind of optimize their field and their silo, and they're really doing really well. But then they're absolute experts in this one thing, and at some point we realized, oh shit, all these things are actually connected, and people have to talk to each other, and it's even worse, they're not even disconnected, it's actually circular. And we're definitely not set up for this in education or in any city administration at this moment in time. And then there's other little issues like we don't even understand what we're talking about. When we're talking about sustainability, for example, the most crucial bit at the beginning in any project is to define, what do we actually mean as a group? How do we understand sustainability? There's so many dimensions that you can look into, and then you realize on every project that as time progresses, your ability to actually have a positive impact on these projects, rapidly decreases. And any change you want to introduce a bit later on the timeline comes with a massive cost. So it's really super important, in my opinion, to do this first bit diligently and really figure out what it is that you're trying to do. And good news is that we are in an unbelievably exciting time, I believe, where we are seeing a convergence of technologies, which is coming from gaming, engineering, machine learning, and robotic automation. So in terms of the built environment, these are all things that people have been thinking about for a long time, but now we're actually, on a day-to-day basis, seeing how this convergence is completely revolutionizing and completely changing the way we design, procure, build, and operate. And as I said, it has been a long time coming, but thinking about stuff is one thing. Now, we actually have the tools and the budgets and the clients, and we are so fucked, that there is no alternative anymore. And so I'm actually of the conviction that I do believe that everything will change in the built environment because we're going to have to change the way we build. And this is a very simple logic where I just follow the money. So the money is in construction. Money is when stuff gets built. And environmental constraints and commercial constraints, economic constraints, leading us to the fact that we have to switch to a componentized, modularized way of construction. And that will change the way we design and procure. And there's just, but the driver will be the construction industry, in my opinion. The beautiful thing is that, in the 70s, when we started looking at modular construction, we were very limited by just what we could build in a factory at the time. Today, we have much more freedom to, we're not bound by anything. We can mass customize, any kind of thing. And I'm especially interested in a new emerging theory where, we're going to have a kind of irregular way of mass manufacturing, which is definitely where we want to go. Reuse is the other big thing that you see the first couple of projects that are actually looking at this in the right way, I believe. Where first of all, you have to know what every material is, so we need to start tracking those materials and understand their life cycle. And then there's a bunch of really interesting companies that are starting to experiment. All of these are experimental projects where nobody has done, has built with recycled materials at scale yet. But there's luckily companies that are trying to figure out what the benefits are, and then they're sharing the learning, because the most important bit at this moment in time is to test and experiment at scale and then share learning, because nobody really knows. But what we do know is that we need to invent new business models and new materials, and I believe very strongly in new aesthetics. And then there's the whole kind of machine learning side of things, which is mind-boggling. I have a lovely friend who's a German machine learning professor, and I talk to him every week, and it feels like every 4 weeks there is a new wave coming that is just, we're just scratching the surface of what is to come. But in the built environment, every couple of months you see new softwares popping up that are all built on someone curating a data set and creating an algorithm that can optimize some of these processes. Another third element to this transformation, I think, is a shift to a kind of more end-user centric way of designing. And so in the same way that we today design or customize our shoes or our cars, I believe that citizens, we will start to understand much more as customers of city, and architecture and cities are products, and so we're going to design architecture like we do design products, and with a much more end-user-centric approach. So my biggest obsession, I think, and then you have to tell me to stop at some point, but my biggest obsession is this being a landscape architect and having had this experience of co-designing with my friends. I think in my lifetime, I will be able to talk to the machine and work with just voice input and simple sketches. So if you and I would be to design a park, what would we do? We would talk about a park, and then you would show me some pictures, and I would show you some, and then we do a very simple sketch, and then in our brains the design forms, and we ping pong back and forth a little bit, and until we can draw it to a high level of detail in 3D. And so there's softwares today, like these friends of ours who are building a software that you can feed a film script in a way. Text is code, and the film script gets analyzed by the machine, and then it builds the film scene in Unreal and adds the animation. And so it's a quick previs tool for Hollywood, really. But you know, there's already beta software test out for systems like Promethean, where you can talk to the engine, so you can tell it, build me a bedroom, it builds you a bedroom. And that's all quite interesting. There's all the kind of stable diffusion stuff. So this is just a text input, it creates a virtual world. This is early days, and we're just playing around with something. But you can get a sense of where this is going. But what I would love to see is another dimension, which is the human spatial experience. So I believe we are all amazing sensors of space, because you enter a space for the very first time and you instantly have a feeling. You instantly think, oh, this is a great space, or this is a shit space. And you are calibrated as a human to be an amazing spatial sensor. And so my question really is, can we tap into this collective spatial knowledge that we all carry in ourselves? We maybe are not able to express it. I can't tell you, how this building should look like, but I can definitely feel it. And so, is there a future where, I can design by feeling a space, and my emotions are actually shaping the environment around me? So when we try to teach I just told this story. Sorry. But I did have a month where 4 friends who all teach at different universities called in 1 month, an architecture professor, urban design, organizational psychology, and machine learning. And they all had the same question. They were like, where can we find a data set that's large enough to train a neural network to understand how humans perceive space? It's a very complicated question, because it's sequential. It has to do with memory. It's not an easy thing to figure out. But I thought, okay, you all have the same question, so why don't you all meet and talk? And out of that is a research project that we just started, where when we try to train a machine to understand images, we created ImageNet, and so maybe there's a 3D ImageNet of some kind. So I do think we are already entering a time where devices and wearables will be able to create a 3D map of the environment you are in. There's a lot of research going into this idea of tracking your emotion, and so what if we combine both of those and create the ability to basically tag the real world with human experience, and then learn from that. So, in theory, this could be the complete nightmare and a complete surveillance state, or, we could democratize design and planning, and, a new way of public participation. So, we have to, all these good things. In the end, I think there's some really universal truths in the fact that, we have to move from, linear to circular processes. And most importantly, we have to start going from short-term to long-term. And this, maybe I end on that, but the short-term, I don't know, maybe I keep going, actually, if you let me. So a plan for the planet is something Bjarke is working on at the moment, which I will not talk much about because it's not really out there yet. But the question was, 6-7 years ago, can you explain to me climate change? What is the problem, and how are we going to fix it on a planetary scale? It's a kind of impossible question to ask, but one of the partners at Big, thought it's an interesting way to, keep a couple of people busy, and so they started 6 years ago to just go through the data and just try to get an understanding, where are we on energy or transportation, food, waste, and everything that's kind of considered the main carbon emitters, and then all the other things that are also you should also be aware of if you think about habitation, and then obviously all these things are somehow connected, and so thousands of slides were created to try to just understand where we are at, and that is kind of crazy because the data that we have on this planet is is so fragmented and so political and so impossible to actually understand what the problem is to start with. You know, that, so one of the missions of this project is to you know, figure out ways in which we can explain things. So if you imagine 10 billion people on the planet, and we cut the planet into 10 billion pieces, then we all have a piece of that size, 238 meters by 238 meters. That's each of us will have one piece, but most of it is water, and then some is uninhabitable, and so that leaves us with this piece of land to live, and then half of it is nature, of which each of us are encroaching on 2 to 3 square meters every year. And then, you know, the question is, okay, how can we get from here, from our current need for land to this kind of relation? And so the idea is to set up a foundation which is really much focused on these 3 things. So on one hand, try to make sense of the data that we have and make it accessible. And then the other bit is that what we're really missing, I think, is positive narratives around a post-carbon future. So, you know, how can we inspire, you know, positive narratives? And then the third bit is, you know, how can we, you know, bring together people and co-create solutions at scale? The other project I want to quickly touch on, because it's relevant, is from Draw. Another good friend, Draw started something called Supernature. Supernature is an attempt to, you know, really learn from nature, and the fact that, you know, we have 3.8 billion years of design evolution that we shouldn't ignore. And so they did something really quite, I find it quite mind-boggling that, you know, this is not, you know, it's only happening now after 3.8 billion years. But you know, what happens if we change the Cartesian grid into and end up with a kind of three-point cellular grid? And if you just do the math, you know, the change is just unbelievable, you know, that you experience. It's the same building area, but, you know, much less road and much more natural space. And so, you know, that is quite a compelling argument, I think, to rethink, you know, the urban form and the structure. And then there's other, you know, good benefits in terms of transportation and construction and energy. But, you know, the Supernature Lab is another foundation that Draw started that is exploring this idea of bioplanning, so a new design discipline for urban planners. And I think they're publishing this book now, like in a week or so. But yeah, I think it's relevant maybe. So yeah, and then that's it. Oh yeah, 3 books. I can leave this page. Thank you very much.